Hello darkness, my old friend. It's another Graham Arnold rant video. Yes, that's right, unless you were living under a rock, you may have heard the news that Australia lost 1-0 to Bahrain in World Cup qualifying on Thursday night. Bahrain scoring a late goal, well, it was actually an own goal, so they didn't actually score it, we did. But the point remains, we lost 1-0 to Bahrain. Yes, we lost 1-0 to Bahrain at home. It's our first loss in a World Cup qualifier, a live World Cup qualifier in donkey years. It's quite baffling how we can lose to a team like Bahrain. And no disrespect to Bahrain, of course. They played quite infuriating. They wasted time. They did a lot of play acting. But playing like gentlemen is not necessarily going to get you to the World Cup. Bahrain knows what it takes to win, and they were doing it at all costs. We wanted to play like gentlemen, but we also didn't really want to play particularly good football. And is that on the ability of some of our players? Yeah, I think it probably lies down to some of the performances of our players, but the way we play is ultimately the fault of the coach. I haven't hidden away from the fact that I am not a Graham Arnold fan. I wasn't a fan of him going into the World Cup. I wasn't a fan of him going to the Asian Cup. He achieved a lot of great things at the 2022 World Cup. We made the round of 16 for the first time in 16 years, and that's a result that should be celebrated. But in the tournament since, I don't know how we continue to defend this man and keep this man on as our coach. I guess let's start with the Bahrain game. Like I've said, no disrespect to Bahrain, but we should not be losing to Bahrain. We should definitely not be losing to Bahrain at home. This team is ranked 80th in the world. Now we can see from the way they played, the individual players, like I said, I don't want to be disrespectful to Bahrain, but I just want to call it spade a spade. Their players aren't particularly skillful. They don't ooze in individual brilliance. I guess our countries, if you want to compare Australia to like France or Argentina, we don't ooze individual brilliance like them. But we are a much better team than Bahrain. But you know what? Bahrain set themselves up fantastically. They played the low block, executed it perfectly. They wasted time. They pissed us off. They pissed off the players. They pissed off me as a fan at home. But they knew what it took to win. They weren't particularly good, but they got themselves a good counter, a lucky deflection, and got the win 1-0. Now, like I said, Bahrain play with a low block, which basically means they like parking the bus. Teams like this know when they go up against Australia, they're going to have a tough time. So they're going to sit back, defend, try and sink a goal on the counter-attack, be a pain in the arse. It's exactly what they did. Graham Arnold's teams have always struggled to break down a low block. In fact, actually, our best games of football have been against teams when we haven't gone up against a team with a low block. When we played Denmark and Tunisia at the World Cup, you could even say we had patches of pretty good form against Argentina too at the World Cup, because we weren't having to deal with a low block, with parking the bus. Some of our worst performances under Graham Arnold are when we come up against those teams that park the bus, like Bahrain the other night, and like India and Syria at the World Cup. I was actually at that game at the Asian Cup in Qatar against Syria, and that was just awesome to be there to see my national team overseas for the first time. Unfortunately, the performance on the field was absolute dog shite. We were lucky to win the match. We just played boring football and we struggled to break down the low block. Now, I'm not a coach, but Graham Arnold is, and he should be adept enough to try and break it down. Did fantastically well in that previous round. Well, I don't even know if we played particularly well. We scraped some good results against worse teams than Bahrain. Another thing is just that I took note of the game against Bahrain was the post-match interview from Alessandro Ciccardi. When they're asking about the game, I think he played right back in the game, and the person the person interviewing him asked what was it like playing out there. He said, I'm playing in a position that I've never played before. This guy's at Parma, Serie A, one of the biggest leagues of football in the world. His team's beat Milan the other week, and yet he's playing a position against Bahrain that he's never played before. And to be particularly honest, it showed at times. Ciccardi, we've been banging on the door about getting a game for Australia. He finally gets a start, and he's just underutilised. And the long balls. I'm bloody sick of the long balls. Do you think after 20 minutes realising that the long balls aren't working, you're going to have to try plan B? Apparently not. A big thing I'm noticing too is a real lack of accountability towards Graham Arnold. We all know the infamous interview between Craig Foster and Ange Postecoglou that was on SBS, 16, 17, 18 years ago, where Craig Foster just had a right old go at Ange Postecoglou.
I bet you haven't. You know why?
Mate, look, to be honest, I haven't looked because we're out. So
yeah.
So he's missed out, I think, on 2 World Cups coaching the junior Australian teams, and we haven't missed those tournaments in years. Mind you, when we did qualify for those tournaments, we were in Oceania, a much easier route to qualify. Then we went to Asia, a much harder route to qualify. We lost to Laos and missed out on the next round, although Laos got booted out because they were playing overage players. But despite how you might perceive Craig Foster and how he came across in that interview, I do think he came across quite arrogant, but I think his point remains that he wanted to keep Australian coaches accountable. Where's Craig Foster now? He's not in the industry anymore. And I'm not having a crack at Craig Foster. He's doing some incredible stuff, some incredible humanitarian stuff away from football. Les Murray, the great Les Murray, has now passed on. We've seen waves of redundancies and cuts in football journalism across our country. We're left with, as far as I'm aware, 1 full-time journalist working for a mainstream newspaper in Vince Regari at the Sydney Morning Herald. We have the freelancer Joey Lynch as well, who does a bit of work for SBS and other stuff. So it's good to have them, but they're just really 2 guys. There might be a few others that I missed, but really, we went from waves of football journalists around the country to just basically 2. How are 2 people going to keep 1 coach accountable? I'm also not going to include Robbie Slater in this. I'm not interested in a glorified rage bait columnist. And considering he's best buddies with Graham Arnold, I don't think we're going to get a biased, impartial view on the matter. He's probably going to go in defending Graham Arnold, like he has done on multiple occasions. Now, I'm not trying to plug Vince Regari's most recent book on Ange Postecoglou, but I was really drawn to some quotes I read this morning from his book, quoting Craig Foster from that interview with Ange Postecoglou. The argument is that national coaches need to be held to a high standard. They need to be held accountable, and quite simply, that wasn't happening at the time. Further on, he goes to say, I would like to think that in future, we have a media in Australia who are prepared to ask those questions. And I'd like to think that we have coaches who are prepared to be asked those questions. Now, let's consider those comments from Craig Foster. Ahead of this little clip, I'd like to show you from the post-game press conference with Graham Arnold. Vince Regari, the writer of that book, and that journal I mentioned from the Sydney Morning Herald, he's the guy who actually asked the question, and as far as I'm aware, it's quite a legitimate, reasonable question.
You had a lot of the ball tonight. I think 4 times as many passes as Bahrain, but I think you ended up with something like 19 touches in their penalty area.
yeah.
Look, I know you give a lot of credit to Bahrain and their defenders, but is something not breaking down there in terms of how you're trying to attack?
Yeah, Vince, you know, I know you guys love carrying on about breaking down teams. You've got to respect the opposition with their defence. And at the end of the day, you know, you've got to have also players with the individual 1v1 quality. So we work on combinations, that half a session we had. The boys, you know, they go out and they do their best. But, you know, sometimes the ball doesn't bounce. And I felt the first half especially, with some of the, you know, balls in the box and that it wasn't really bouncing for us. And those things happen.
You had a lot of the ball tonight.
The ball wasn't really bouncing for us. What a load of bullshit from our national coach, who has just been embarrassed by Bahrain. As far as I'm aware, it's our most embarrassing performance in my living memory. Of course, I didn't live through that infamous draw with Iran, but that was a draw, that wasn't a loss. And Iran are a much more competent team, no offence once again to Bahrain. But that loss to Bahrain is unexcusable. It was a disgraceful performance from a man who's been in the job for way too long now. And the way he just laughs off that question from Regari, a very legitimate, reasonable question, is just pathetic from our national coach. We as fans deserve better. Now, do I actually think Graham Arnold's going to be sacked? Well, we head into a match on Tuesday night against Indonesia. Indonesia, who, in terms of population, is the biggest country in the world where football is the #1 sport. They've struggled for years and years to put any decent performances on at a national level. Now they've started to pick up more players from overseas through ancestry. Their performances are starting to improve. But if we do not get a result against Indonesia on Tuesday night, I can see no reason why Graham Arnold should keep his job. If we do not win in Indonesia, Graham Arnold has to be sacked. Of course, James Johnson won't be watching this podcast, or if you are watching, James, big shout out to you. Please do us all a favour and sack Graham Arnold. He is living off the run from the 2022 World Cup, which is, in all fairness to him, was a great success. But one man should not be able to keep the job forever because of something he'd done a couple of years ago. His performances since that World Cup have been dog shit, and he needs to go.